Live now. So,
Right,
Alastair.
Rory, here we go. Welcome to the Rest is Politics, everybody. Me, Alastair Campbell.
And me, Rory Stewart. And Alastair, what's your first thoughts?
My first thought is that it's not going to change much. I thought the format was not great. When my heart sank when Julie Etchingham said, "You have 45 seconds to respond," and I think that, I mean, it was pretty obvious to me what both of them were trying to do, and I'm not sure the format really helped either of them. Rishi Sunak desperately wanted to land this Labour will put your taxes up by 2,000. He said it 15, 20 times. I thought Keir was a bit slow to knock it down. And by the time the knockdown came, it's obvious to me Sunak is just going to keep doing that sort of thing. And I think I said in one of our earlier podcasts that the Tory strategy, I think, is all about, when it comes to television, just getting these clips and then they're bombarding them out onto social media through the people that they want to reach. And I thought that Keir Starmer, he wanted to land 14 years. This isn't just about now, it's about 14 years. And I think he did that. I think that Sunak, if I've got a big criticism of Sunak, he was the worst at the talking over and the tetchiness and so forth. And I think if I had a criticism of Keir, it's that he was good at the prosecution against the Tories, but there wasn't enough maybe of the forward plan for Labour.
Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating, isn't it? Because when you watch it on social media, and I've been struck with this, I guess you must have seen this all your life, how we see it through such a prism of prejudice.
Yeah.
that Tories basically watching it. I was watching it with my mother, who's more sympathetic towards Rishi Sunak, and with Shoshana, who's more sympathetic towards Keir Starmer. They might as well have been watching different shows. I mean, and I think the same is true if you go on Twitter. It's very, very difficult. I mean, I think you.
So hold on, what were they saying?
Oh well, so on immigration, for example, Shoshana would be very taken with Starmer's kind of clear defense of the ECHR.
Yeah.
My mother would be like, yeah, but what is what is Keir Starmer going to do? I mean, to be fair to my mother, I think the bit that really connected with her as a Conservative voter, she's a loyal Conservative voter, she's going to vote Conservative. The one that worked for her from Keir Starmer was the 14 years stuff. Even she squirmed a bit and thought, well, that's kind of a point. I mean, why didn't we manage to do this? And when he said, listen, this national service stuff, you just put it out for the election, haven't you? Why don't you do it? And my mother said, well, he's got a point there. He's got a point there. Why don't he do it? So I think Starmer's fundamental idea has to be the right one, which is he had that line where he said, listen, you just keep talking about the future because you can't talk about the past. You can't talk about your record. You can't talk about your leaders. You have to keep promises. And then now the bits though where, I mean, this may be a bit going back to my own debate against Boris Johnson when I was got myself in a muddle. It's this question of how do you deal? You go in there, and my strategy with Boris Johnson actually was exactly Rishi Sunak's strategy. I wanted to say to Boris Johnson, how are you going to do this, Boris? How are you going to do this, Boris? But of course, in the case of Emily Maitlis, she didn't let me. She said, wait a sec, you're not here to ask the questions. Every time I try to come in, I'd get cut off. And I try to, when I'd say, how do you do it? She would treat this as my 1 minute intervention. I'd lose my whole intervention. And it's a difficult one because I think I can see that Sunak will be irritating. And there was a moment where Shoshana said, I said, oh, that's a good point by Sunak. And she said, I've just stopped listening to him. I missed that whole point. But I also think he needs to do it, even if he comes across as rude, even if he comes across as mansplaining. His only hope is to say, how are you going to do it? £2,000 in tax.
Yeah.
Tax.
Yeah. The only thing I felt though, I mean, I suppose that's right. But I said a couple of weeks ago on the podcast that I feel there's something deeply inauthentic about Rishi Sunak because it's like he's been given a script. Okay. And I really felt that strongly tonight. So clear plan, bold action. It was in his first sentence. It was in his second sentence. Then he got onto the £2,000 and he just kept coming back. Now, okay, I'm the great believer. You land a message, but I feel you've got to sort of believe it. And I just didn't. I just felt the tetchiness there. And also, I actually think that having a woman moderator, I think you've got to be particularly careful about the sort of the shouting and the shouting across. And I think in the first half, Keir Starmer tried to stay right out of that. But you get drawn into it. But I think that's the fault of the format. So here's you and I, and looking at the hundreds of questions coming in, we've clearly got quite a lot of people who come on to hear us talk. I would no more think of cutting you down after 45 seconds. That was the only, you have to get everything into 45 seconds. And I just think that, why can't we have a debate where it's a real debate, where you get real time to explore stuff? It sort of felt at time, and I get the thing, you want to bring in the public and the, and you can see who's got more empathy. I get all that. But it felt a little bit to me like a cross between a political program and a bit of a game show. The sort of raise your hands and all that stuff.
Yeah.
I just wanted something a bit more serious, I think.
So Felicity Orwell came in saying, format's terrible. You can't talk about ideas in 30-second answers. And I couldn't agree more. I mean, you could make it much longer. I don't know, make it a couple of hours long. Give them longer to talk, give them longer to answer. It actually might get more interesting because...
Yeah, and also if you take when they started, at the start, I mean, Keir Starmer's opening remarks, they were about 20 seconds. The ending, actually, I thought the endings were better. Maybe by then they'd sort of got warmed up a bit. But I think the public, I think the media has this view that we all have the attention span of a gnat. And I don't think we do.
And given the personalities, oddly, they're better and more interesting when you give them a bit of more space, because both of them actually are quite interested in policy.
Yeah.
And I think one of the interesting things was that Starmer got going and sounded much more credible and detailed when he got onto education. For some reason, he wasn't putting in as much detail on health, but he did well in education. And obviously he had clear things to say about energy, clear stuff to say about boats. And
what did you think?
You got the sense you gave him more time, he could do more. And Sunak, of course, with all his flaws, he knows his stuff. He's got his facts. He can talk in quite a lot of detail. I mean, so you could have had the two of them talking in much more detail about lots of these issues with a bit more time, and it probably would have been a bit more interesting than seeing them try to jump down each other's throats.
What did you think about the national security exchanges when Julie Etchingham said to Rishi Sunak, are you seriously telling us that this guy can't be trusted with national security? And that was the point where I felt Keir Starmer got most passionate and a bit angry.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting one too. Sorry, that's slightly off the subject, but that was something where Shoshana said to me, he can't afford to look that wound up. It doesn't look prime ministerial. And she said it reminded her, there were just a couple of moments when Starmer closed his eyes and was wincing. She said it kind of reminded her of my taking my tie off. It's a kind of horrible moment where...
Oh, it wasn't as bad as that. It wasn't as bad as that.
No, definitely not as bad as that. But that sense, I can completely sympathize with him. He obviously is very, very irritated. He's very angry with what Sunak's saying. He thinks that Sunak is being dishonest. Thinks Sunak's not facing up to his record. And that's showing on his face. But I do think there's a sense in which, and this is something that the awful Boris Johnson, of course, is quite good at, is that he projects the kind of happy, optimistic warrior, whatever's coming at him. And I think the public doesn't want to see you looking flustered.
Yeah, I don't think he looked flustered. I think he looked pissed off at the format. I think he felt, my sense watching them both, I quite enjoyed it when there was the split screen. But I think my sense was that he was feeling that Julie Etchingham was cutting into him more than Sunak when Sunak was,
But do you agree with me? Do you agree with me? However we describe it, he shouldn't really show that. That it would, in an ideal world.
I think if you're standing there to be prime minister and the occupant of the post is saying, or trying to say without saying it, I wouldn't trust you with national security. I thought the substance of his answer about I was, dealing with an operation to take down a terrorist gang while it was about to
That was good.
Yeah,
That was good.
that's
Yeah.
the bit that I meant.
Yeah.
And so I thought there was kind of real passion there.
No, that was
I
strong. I was thinking more about the bits, split screen bits where he was just like shocking,
Yeah,
shocking, and
desperate.
I just it doesn't look strong. Doesn't
Yeah.
look strong
That
doing that. No.
reminded me of, I think, was it Al Gore and George W. Bush? When, do you remember the sort of lasting memory of it was Al Gore constantly sighing
Yeah,
at,
exactly.
at George
Yeah.
Bush. There's a bit of that. I mean, it'd be interesting to know what, if anything, people really take out of this that sort of sticks. The Tories will want the £2,000 to stick, and that will be being pumped out now all across social media. I think Labour definitely, it's clear to me, and you can see this as well from, I think I saw their election broadcast on social media tonight, absolutely going on Tory switchers who are fed up with the chaos of the 14 years, living standards, etc. The other moment that really stood out to me, and sort of most of it was quite predictable, was actually when Rishi Sunak was talking about his national service plan, and people started laughing. I thought that was a
Yeah.
bit. That
Yeah,
was a
yeah,
bit
no,
of
no,
a shock.
that was must have been very kind of upsetting for him. On the £2,000 stuff, I felt there was an opportunity for Starmer to shut that down much more quickly.
Mm.
When I said that on Twitter, and I can see some of this in the chat and the comments now, people saying she didn't give him the chance to. That's not
Well,
quite true. He had 5 or 6 things where he
I think that
chose
I'm not
to
sure.
talk about other stuff.
No, I kind of agree with that. Well, first of all, I think they should probably have seen it coming, and should probably therefore have, yes, the very first time he should have done the answer that he did later on when he said, "Look, let me explain what's happened. They
Yeah,
fed in a load of assumptions to the Treasury. The
yeah.
Treasury has costed them. They're made up policies. They're their policies, our policies. And now you're going to get that on your Facebook feed and you get that on social media. Just ignore it. It's garbage." And then he could have moved on from it.
And I've
But
got another one he could do. I mean, I'd be tempted to turn around and say, look at the numbers. We will be costing you £9,000 or whatever it is less than the Conservatives, because remember the Conservatives are now pumping out these new ideas. Triple
mm,
dot pluses on pensions. They're signaling on VAT. They're signaling on all this stuff.
yeah,
So he could have produced a counter figure, and he said, not only is that bullshit, but actually they're going to be costing us. The
yeah, yeah.
Conservatives are going to cost you £7,000 more than we will,
And
and
interestingly,
that
before,
would have thrown Sunak on the back foot, and he would have been like, "Where does that number come from? That's
yeah,
rubbish."
yeah,
And
yeah.
then you could have said, "You've said that you're going to cut VAT. You said you're
Mm,
going to get rid of
mm, mm,
inheritance tax." You
mm.
could have just turned it all around on top of him.
It's interesting. There's a question here from Rob Roy. By the way, Rob, I actually visited your grave last week when I was up in Scotland. I'm assuming you're not the dead Rob Roy. Rob Roy says, "We who follow politics," I think he's saying people who come on to listen to us talk about this after the event, "we're not the target audience. Starmer was making his opening pitch to millions of viewers who don't know him." I think there's something in that, and I think that he, because of the format, because of the tetchiness and the talking across each other, I think he probably managed to do less of that than he would have wanted to do, because it just got, I think, too tetchy. I thought the other moment that I thought was I thought he did land a blow on Sunak when he got into the numbers about the waiting lists. How could you say they're coming down when they were 7.2 and they're now 7.5? And Sunak's answer was met with a little bit of ridicule in the audience. So
Yeah,
obviously, it's hard to know if you're not there as well. Because I mean, Julie Etchingham said that the audience sort of reflects the country and all that. But if you're in the room, you get a sense of the politics of the place. You can see whether they're smiling when they walk in. You can see if there's anybody there who really dislikes one of them. But I got the feeling that the moments where Sunak was very controlled and sort of constantly argumentative, putting the point. I think he will have felt he was doing the job that, as it were, if it was a boxing match, that the seconds had told him to do. But if the goal for Sunak and his team was to change the fundamentals, I'm not sure that worked.
no, he's definitely not changed the fundamentals, but he shouldn't have been allowed to get away, I'm afraid, with landing that £2,000 point. Whatever you said, 14, 15 times. I think, look, it's not going to turn the election around at all.
Mm.
But just if insofar as this debate matters at all, that's something that was an unnecessary victory for Sunak. And I think with a little bit of thought, a little bit of prep, Starmer should have found ways of shutting that down more quickly. And instead of just kind of getting around it. There's some questions coming in, and I wanted to bring some of them in. A lot of people asking us now about the English football question. I mean, boy, I would have been completely finished by the English football question. So Kai Hughes, poor debate encapsulated by the awful football question. What did you think about Gareth Southgate sending in a question?
I mean, I can't believe for 1 second he would have done it without being asked to do it by ITV. I'm assuming it was Gareth from the England football camp. I don't think it added anything to the debate. I think if they wanted to, and again, I think this goes back to my point about, you know, the broadcasters being, well, we have to try and get them to show a human side. That doesn't show a human side. It sort of tries to catch them out a bit, and neither of the answers were great, and there was nothing great you can really say in that. But you know, and Sunak, because I don't think he is very quick on his feet in those ways, he actually said you've got to have a clear plan and take bold action. So he just thought, you know, I think when she said it's the last question.
Is that actually good advice in football? I mean, does bold action really sit? I mean, does it apply?
Well, a clear
well
plan is
football?
right, but bold action not necessarily. If you're playing very defensively, no, I didn't think that added much to it.
Listen, one more that we talk about a lot. Thomas Wicks has just asked a question. There's why nothing on the EU. There's been another, I think, 9 questions on this. Yeah. Surely there was a chance, you know, whatever we think about, and you know, we've talked about this. Obviously, Sunak and Rachel Reeves and Starmer are all pushing for these red wall voters, so they don't want to sound like they're anti-Brexit. But presumably there was an opportunity to say, whatever you think about Brexit, you guys have got nothing out of it. You've really screwed this one up. How come you're not talking about it? You boasted about it in 2019. You got Brexit done. Yeah. Why aren't you talking about it? Why isn't it? What have you actually delivered? You know, what's the?
I think when towards the end, when Keir Starmer was doing his, you know, you can't fight on your record, you can't do your leaders. So you just sort of bang on about, you know, the past is a foreign country kind of thing. I think if you're talking about the big consequential changes of the Conservative 14 years, Brexit is a big one. And I do think that, I think again, though, that I think that's a failure of the broadcasters. You know, to my mind, I think 2 questions, that the one on the economy and the one on leadership in the world, I think were an opportunity for Keir Starmer to take up the cudgels against them on Brexit without, you know, changing Labour policy or anything like that. And I also think that the failure of our broadcasters to understand that out there are millions of people who at least want to see this as part of the debate. There was a very interesting thing on, I was listening to the PM programme this afternoon, and it was rather refreshing, actually. They said, we're going to have a sort of election panel. This is normally where we'd bring in a few sort of political correspondents or former Downing Street communications directors, but we're actually going to get 3 people who've done none of that. And they got Justin King, business, David Omand from the security and intelligence world, and the former children's commissioner. And they sort of talked to them as a panel. And so 2 of the 3 said they found it unbelievable. David Omand and Justin King, they found it unbelievably depressing that Brexit's not even on there. Interestingly, by the way, Rory, I must tell you this, and if people haven't listened to the main podcast, which you can also see on Channel 4 at 11:10 tonight, you having sort of gone for Ed Davey over all his stunts, Justin King said that Ed Davey was so far the man of the match. The other two went for Keir Starmer.
And Ed Davey has done some very strong interviews recently, returning to some of the themes that he did in our much longer interviews on Leading, where he talks wonderfully kind of honestly and openly about his family. And there is a sense that neither of them are quite fully connecting. So I thought, let's just go back to the beginning again for a second, because we've had a couple of questions on this. I think Keir Starmer at the beginning was much better connecting with the woman asking about, you know, basically cost of living and her financial struggles. Yeah. And it was very, very odd that Rishi Sunak wasn't able to just stop for a second and say, listen, Paula, I hear you. That's terrible. And I understand how bad this is. I mean, he just sounded kind of touchy. But neither of them were that great on the NHS stuff. I couldn't understand why they really weren't able, because as we know, Rishi Sunak's dad's a GP, his mother's a pharmacist, and am I right that Keir Starmer's wife is a
She
doctor?
was
Is that right?
no, she was in the National Health Service
That's
on
the
the
NHS,
management side, yeah.
but anyway, I mean, the huge opportunity for both of them to really lean into that, and actually they didn't. We've got this interview coming up with Wes Streeting, where I thought he was so good, and it would have been lovely to hear
Mm, mm,
Rishi Sunak say what his shadow health secretary says, which is the fundamental problem in the NHS is that we're spending too much money in hospitals and not enough money at the front line with GPs and pharmacies. And if you're treating stage 4 cancer, it's far too late and far too expensive. We should get it at stage 1. And he could have done that, right? Might
yeah.
even been able to do that in 45 seconds.
Yeah, possibly. But again, if you the reason why I think when we put out the West Streeting interview, people will enjoy it is because it's got time to breathe. And I think that what that debate didn't have was time to breathe and to give people a sense of two serious people having serious debates about serious issues. Um, I think that the format, I think that these TV debates have just got themselves into a bit of a rut about how they do them. I mean, to be honest, if we go back to I was I think I've told you before, I was David Cameron to both Gordon Brown and Ed Miliband in the debate preparations,
I
and
can see it. You're just like him. It's that old
I
Etonian
was
swagger
good.
that you have.
I was okay at David Cameron. I mean, the mess we inherited, I could do a good mess we inherited for you. But I think that for you put hundreds of hours into it. I don't know how much time Keir Starmer
Yeah,
and Rishi
yeah,
Sunak put
yeah.
into this. You put a lot of time into it. A lot of people working on it. Um, and then I can remember at the end of all of the debates, as you say, you go out. There'll all be there's the spin room. I don't know if you know where the spin alley phrase comes from. It was back in one of the first American presidential debates, where you had the Democrat and the Republican up against each other. I can't remember which election it was, but it was one of the way back in when television was just starting. And so you had the debate. And then as they came out of the debate, the candidates went off, and then the media, hundreds of journalists there. And there was this thing called Spin Alley. It was actually called Spin Alley. And if you go on the right, you'll find the people who tell you that the Democrats won. And if you go on that side, they'll all tell you that the Republicans won. And of course, they're lined up there well before the debate takes place. So you'll have that in Manchester now. They'll all be running around, rebutting this, rebutting that. John Ash was there.
And repeating the central lines, won't they? So the
Repeating all the central lines,
Conservatives will all be saying, I mean, it's very kind of people to listen to us, but if you left us and went into those rooms, you'd have one lot saying, well, Labour's going to cost £2,000, and the other side saying, in the end, they've done nothing in 14 years.
Exactly.
They've got nothing to say about their record and their leaders.
Exactly. So we didn't have the debates in. John Major wanted us to have debates in 1997, and we said yes, okay, let's do them. But then we just sort of allowed the negotiations to kind of dribble into the sand. And look, I think it's a pity, because I think there will be people who are watching those debates who maybe haven't been following things very, very closely. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe it's a way into the debate. But I honestly would love it if somebody would come along and say, look, let's have a really long, serious debate where we don't say answer in 45 seconds. We say, look, you've got 5 minutes each. And then we'll have a bit of sort of crossfire. But I think the other thing that they should do, by the way, I think they should silence the microphones whilst the other person is speaking, because that's the only way you'll stop the sort of cross.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's what happened to me in my catastrophic BBC debate. They silenced me. And so I'm sort of shouting at Boris, how are you going to do this, Boris? And nobody can hear me. And it works very well, except, of course, it gives a huge opportunity to Boris to waffle on. I mean, the problem is it depends who you're debating. I mean, and I think some of these people can chew up 3-5 minutes without saying anything at all. He talks about the, I was rewatching the George W. Bush Al Gore debate. And there's an incredible moment in the center of it where George W. Bush just gets all his numbers wrong on pensions. And Al Gore, thinks this is this great moment. And he jumps in and he's like, no, if you are somebody living on the Canadian border and you're on, $23,000 a year, you would in fact find that your pension goes up by, 6,323. And he goes on like this. And George W. Bush just turns to the camera and he says, geez, I knew this guy had invented the computer. I didn't realize he'd invented the calculator. And he wins the whole thing, right?
Yeah.
So I think that there is a sense, I mean, and that's something I was wondering about watching this, whether they're not both a little bit too sort of wound up and technocratic, whether a much kind of sunnier, more relaxed person mightn't walk it.
Yeah, but I wouldn't. You know from the time you did it in the Tory leadership debate, I think even bigger for them when it's just the two of them head to head, and the race is to be prime minister. It's a pretty high pressure thing. But I think we could have done with a bit of light relief from both of them at times. I thought it was, you said on the main podcast this week the things that you'd like to hear them debating and standing up for. I thought that Keir Starmer, interestingly to me, and maybe this was just the sort of Labour section of the audience, but I thought the two moments where I kind of heard louder than usual applause. One was when he defended his policy on VAT on private school fees, and the other when he just said, no, we are not coming out of the European Convention on Human Rights, and gave the reason for it.
That was beautiful, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And it was beautiful because that was one of the really, it was controversial. Sunak had just said the opposite.
Yeah.
It absolutely tied in with his expertise. This is a human rights lawyer talking about ECHR. He really knows his stuff. He's taking a risk because it's not going to be popular with everybody, and he's putting his clear principles out there, and that's where you get the applause. And it would be great if he did more of that stuff.
Yeah, I agree, and I hope that gave him maybe confidence to do that more. They'll go away. They'll probably. I see that Reese245 says Sunak's winning in the polls across social media. YouGov says it's Sunak 51% to Starmer 49. Well, that's basically what we said at the start. It's like that's what we call a draw. It's interesting. I watched it with Fiona and the real Rory, and Fiona was just sort of occasionally laughing at funny things that people were saying on Twitter. I've discovered that she had a bit of a sweepstake going with Callum, our other son, about when Keir Starmer would say that his dad was a toolmaker and when Rishi Sunak would say that his dad was a doctor. But it was, I think it was okay, but in the end, I was a little bit disappointed by the whole thing, and I thought that. I think both of them had clear objectives. I think both of them met those objectives in a very kind of quite clumsy way, but I think both of them will think, could have done better.
Yeah. Okay. So I think coming to the end and looking forward to getting to the next debates. I don't think it's I mean I think you're right there. I mean I think that 51-49 though is probably will be a little encouraging to the Tories. I mean they've had such a dismal 2 weeks. They're so far behind in the polls, and so thinking of my colleagues, it's not it's not going to make a big difference in the election. But there will be a lot of my colleagues thinking, okay, Rishi Sunak was vigorous. He might have been annoying, but he landed his points. He's quite a good debater. And even if it was neck and neck, that's going to feel like a bit of a win to the Tories, who felt so far behind for a couple of weeks.
Yeah, but I think up to a point. I think there'll be, it was maybe. Anyway,
I love abolish the monarchy. Starmer was streets ahead of Sunak. No comparison.
I'll just go through. We've had loads and loads of people. I don't know. I'd love to know the political makeup of our.
Wait a sec. Michael Stanley, AC got COVID.
No, I haven't got COVID. I've got a problem with my trachea at the moment. Don't worry about it. I promise it's not COVID. And even if it was,
Jai Sriland, Sunak wiped the floor with Starmer. I love the fact that everyone's so confident on both sides.
Yeah. Oh, Richard Gilmore says Alastair needs to prepare Starmer for future debates. Reese Nicholson, the crowd helped Starmer. I'm not sure about that. I did think Julie was a bit rougher on Keir than she was on Rishi. There's George Austin, late Starmer won. Yeah, there's Kai Hughes. Alastair needs a minute after the cringy football question. Yeah. Kyron, 2 words, Ming Vase. Drew Perkins, we learnt nothing from this.
Is the Ming vase a reference to the thing in the back of my thing with the lampshade on it?
Oh,
Or
I
is that a
wonder if it
reference?
is.
Yeah,
People are still talking about your £1,000, whatever it was that you had
yeah,
sent
exactly.
in from somewhere recently.
Exactly, that's right.
Anyway, there's some very, very interesting comments going through. I would say if we had to sum them up, yeah, there's Mama Rebel, nobody won. Richard Bowen, can't help feeling there were no winners and a big loser here, the British people. I don't think it was that bad. Quite a few people, I won't tell Tony this, but quite a few people saying, bring back Blair. Anyway, there we are. So listen, I think we're done, and we'll probably. Are you going to stay up and watch us on Channel 4 at 10 past
Yeah.
11?
Just to remind people, we've got an episode of the podcast going out 10 past 11, Channel 4 this evening, where we discuss Israel, South Africa, and obviously more on the general election.
Yep.
And we'll be recording another pod live on YouTube tomorrow afternoon, 5:30.
Oh, really?
Which is also going to touch on India. Incredible results coming in from Modi. So if people are a bit bored of the British election, we promise to expand it up, show you some of the big stuff.
And maybe we should have a discussion of what we about what we think. Phil R, is Alastair short of cash and so got the lights off? The lights are all actually on. I don't know what's going on. They're all on, but for some reason I do look very, very, very dark. I think we should have a proper discussion tomorrow about England's strategy for the Euros.
Yeah, I can help you there. I can help you a great deal there. Thank you all very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you for all your questions. Bye.
Bye-bye.